screaming into combat. Immortal trying to break through the front, understandable. And if Salifs can just continue this ram, then that's kind of a really bad situation. Because Immortal can't do anything here, and Salifs is just going to continue to chew through that front. Despite having energy constraints, it's not at all an issue, and Immortal is just completely stuck, unfortunately. Losing rails already. Is managing to get free a little bit, and hopefully Salifs will slide off. Immortal does manage to free himself from Salifs, but it won't matter for long, because now Salifs is in the same exact position. Salifs is commenting on the fact that Immortal, there is a exploit in the game that has yet to be fixed, where you can aim nukes past their 200 degrees of aiming, and it is banned, but given the fact that Immortal is probably going to be losing this match immediately anyways, it's not the biggest of issues. It is not... It was not advertised or made well apparent. Tactic is not tournament legal, so that is partially my fault. But for future reference, for all participants, do not use the nuke trick to aim past your given 200 degrees, because it's not legal. Don't do it. Mortal might be turning on his lag switch now that he's losing. A common joke. But yeah, Salif's just gonna destroy the reactor. Immortal forfeits. Understandable. And the issue with this is that look at all this point defense. 24 point defense from Mint, and all those shields. And as you might have noticed, Stoking only has missiles. So if you were there... And I'm going to cry if you get stuck on this rock. Oh, man, this is bothering me. I believe in you, Mint. This is certainly one of the ways this could have gone. Mint does manage to launch the nukes at least, does a significant amount of damage. Mint, surprisingly, despite getting stuck on the rock, is not out of it. Slowking took a huge amount of damage because he did nothing to dodge the nukes there. So despite the fact that Mint didn't take advantage of the point defense, still seems as though they're gonna win. And something I think will actually be relevant here is the small drone ship with the 4 cannons, because you see, if you look at Terratron's ship, look at all that exposed reactor thruster flesh. You can just fire cannons into that and have a great time. Fortunately, the control rooms are protected, but if you lose... If you have cannons that set fires to things, it's going to be a problem. Unless, of course, air just decides to pilot it straight into death. And that's one of the tactics you could use, but I guess it's not going to be exciting and relevant. So, air is going to hopefully flip Terratron here, using superior thrust and the tractor beams. And then shoot all manner of cannons and the 2 one-off nukes into Terratron's back side of his ship. Firing around the shields, air recognizes that he cannot break through those shields, most likely. And that is exactly what we want here for air. Terratron getting flipped. Tractor beams are stronger when they have this amount of leverage from this angles, as well as when they're closer. And as you can see, air is going to be moving forward with their incredibly fast ship. And just bullying Terratron around, throwing him around to his heart's content, and there's nothing he can really do about it. And despite the fact that he's not taking damage from the front, those ions can't break through those shields. It's just not going to happen. Especially when he's shaking this much, and the ions are doing very little to actually properly track. So air being very careful to not get stuck on the asteroid, that's certainly a way to close it. But even if that were to occur, Air doesn't exactly have a problem because the tractor beams can just push him off. So Terratron is trying to put his back to the asteroid to prevent it from being flipped, because if you just push into it, then you're fine. However, Air knows the old ways and can just come from an angle and push him off. And now there's this massive hole because he lost the large reactor. So this is a funny thing because depending on the avoider skill, it's either a complete sweep for them against the deck cannon rammer, or if they suck, it is just a strict win for the deck cannon rammer. And Too Much Aaron, I think, demonstrated that if you do not have the sufficient skill, it is a very sad match for the avoider. Nuzmus, however, seems to know what they're doing, and they don't have to deal with hooks. However, Nug is a very scary player, and is using the best version of deck rammers for this particular engagement, I would say. So let's see if Nuzmus has what it takes. And is definitely doing a good job thus far. Ideally, you wouldn't be taking shield damage because that makes it so if you get a hit there, then you have a problem. Also, the reactors are being stressed. So Nuzmus isn't switching directions nearly enough. Losing a large shield is catastrophic. This next one might hurt. Nuzmus, fortunately, is now jockeying back and forth out of position again, but still, losing that large shield is very bad, and it also cut off energy to smaller shields and destroyed a smaller shield as well. So he is taking hits, which ideally you don't do at all whatsoever. So Nug, even despite being in a arguably bad matchup, is still managing to deal a little bit of damage, claw his way through the matchup. And there we go. More damage. Losing the large shield in the center like that is a very big issue. So Nug was disengaging for a little bit to recharge the shields. This combination of armor and shields is very strong. And even though the disruptors can tear through the shields, that amount of armor is still very difficult to get through. And if you just disengage to let shields recharge, then it just has so much health that you have to deal with. Nug choosing to disengage rather than try and skirt around the asteroid. Smart move, I would say. However, if Nuzmus is smart, they will now take advantage of the asteroid that has been presented to them. See, they can very easily fly around the asteroid because they have more thrust for maneuvering. Unless they touch it. And Nug is doing an excellent job ramming. Loses both large shields. Oh no. Nug doing fantastic to prevent Nuzmus from getting away. But Nuzmus is breaking out the old tricks of getting the ship to kill itself via an asteroid. Let's see if Nug can get off in time. This might be real bad. This is the main reason I would say that this is one of the main reasons why this is a very terrible matchup for the deck cannon rammer, is that since you're all forward thrust and you hit the asteroid, you just die. So even despite the fact that Nuzmus was losing, Nug has now very safely lost this match. Understandable that Nug is a little bit irritated. It's never a good way to go out. So we had a similar matchup to this. I can't remember who, but Nuzmus was using this very ship to push at a deck cannon ship and it being torn apart. I believe it was Cool Gamertag, and it was featured on the thumbnail of the highlights of the last match. So Nug clearly didn't do his studies, which seems to be a common trend for the high seed players, and might just suffer another loss here. Oh, that's a good tilt. Nuzmus unfortunately cannot capitalize on it. Might be invested in getting to the control room, which of course is very vulnerable, as Nug himself pointed out. And that's already some amount of damage on it. Very not good for Nug. Definitely may have been a fluke to let his opponent pick the TB rail, and is doing a good job of protecting it, but will not get many more chances to have clean shots at the TB rail with the deck cannons, which is, in a certain sense, better at avoiding the deck cannon shots because it can force the opponent to tilt. So instead of dodging the deck cannon shots, you force your opponent to miss, as well as just being very hard to catch because of how actively moving it is. Nuzmus suffering from logistical issues though. Some of the rails are offline, not a full clean volley. Creates some damage in the side armor, so if he gets tilted again, he can puncture that, potentially shoot at the reactor, or clear a row of deck cannons. Only one shield blocking that. Holding fire excellently. Well done from Nuzmes. I can't tell if the rails are set to hold fire or fire at target with a cleared target. Oh. Knocks all the shields offline in front of the reactor, control room. And flips the tractor beam aiming. There we go. That's a good roll. Gonna be aiming at that corner, probably? No. Was ideally probably going to be aiming from the reactor, for the reactor, but did not rotate quickly enough in time. It's worth noting that Nug is piloting a much simpler ship in terms of piloting, whereas Nesmus has to control push and pull, where it pushes and pulls, the rail targeting, all very actively. Which, suffice to say, is very, very difficult, and it's impressive that it's going this well, I would say. And, Nesmus appears to have the target assigned to that rear reactor. Oh! Nug loses the reactor. Nug still losing control, insulting his opponent. Vicious words to try and get back the damage as best he can, failing to do so. Will likely not be resisting tractor beams nearly as well because he lost roughly half of his thrust there. Or will be losing half of his thrust after the energy runs out. And as you can see, Nug is being pushed a lot more actively now, and is not even getting remotely close as he was before. And that is a clean shot dead through the center. Let this be a lesson. You cannot bring deck cannon rammers against TB rails, at least against skilled opponents. So this is just going to be like going sideways, and then it's just going to like launch nukes and then run away. Oh, Nick decides to disconnect the armor for sake of higher speed. Now, this is something that I would say is pretty normal. It's typically a pretty good tactic, but the issue is that when you have your opponent going at a casual, of course, breakneck pace of 140 meters a second, they don't care that you can dodge nukes. They're just gonna like shove them down your throat. Like, it doesn't matter how fast you are because the opponent is faster. And Nick, well, I have to suspect that, like, Nick knows this and decided to break off the armor for aiming purposes. But as you can see here, Pine can just fly in circles around it, and those nukes are spread out pretty well. Gonna be dodged, though. Except for those. Pine launched both sides. Nick not out of it yet, but still, worse for wear at 65% of his health. Pine did not make sure that he had reloaded, so would have done a killing shot if he had nukes available, but did not, so unfortunately just kind of bounced into his opponent. Throwing nukes all over the place, rams Nick to try and prevent him from dodging these. Nick either lost both connections to his armor or knocked it off for sake of trying to avoid it. Kind's point defense is probably going to be destroying the prisms if given enough time. And see, this is the issue if you take too much damage, is that you can't break the shields. And, yup. Didn't chain, though. Interesting. And Kind does the momentum throwing of the nukes by spinning. It's kind of unfortunate we didn't get to see Slowking using his as the person who kind of did it first. But not, apparently, not necessarily the best. So Nick deciding to, again, discard his armor. Not sure about that one, but is... Let's see how his tactics are different this time, if at all. Pine is still probably just gonna like do a sideswipe and sling the nukes into him with momentum. Nick trying to ram him. Oof. At least before Nick wasn't stuck on an asteroid. Nick doing nothing to change his tactics to save him from last time. Manages to lose a few launchers. probably through friendly fire, which means that the most damage Nick has done has been actually Kine doing it to himself. Agreeing to a mirror match. Mirror matches are probably the best demonstration of skill because it's the same limitations, how you work with them. So both of these players have disconnectable armor, but they also have a lot of shields. Game Knight has 10 large shields with 20 ions. Lunastro has 6 large shields for smalls with 20 ions. So Lunastro spent most of their budget, the budget difference on armor, as opposed to Game Knight spending it on shields, I would say. They have roughly the same amount of thrusters. Lunastro does have disruptors, but it's going to be very difficult getting those into play. I think Lunastro is aiming to disconnect the armor by cutting off the sides, the corners. So now the Game Knight's left side is cut off, so Lunastro just needs to rotate and destroy the other side. And then it is already in shield territory for Game Knight. However, Lunastro, it seems, is rather focused on trying to breach the side armor, or the armor side. So Game Knight decides that this is not going well, and is going into kite mode, where he can aim his ions, and no longer has armor protecting them. So disruptors are now going to come into play. Game Knight doing not a great job of running away because there was a rock in the way. Lunastro disconnects the hook just in time to not get stuck. Manages to rotate off. That hook was probably going to be somewhat important, but it was more important to not immediately die. So Lunastro, excellent quick time event that they managed to survive. And this is not a good arrangement because those shields are going to go down before Lunastro can get rid of Game Knights. Lunastro, you need to pay attention and notices it. This is why you add small shields. Small shields are very, very good at keeping your large shields alive, and effectively serves as like the last resort so that you don't lose your large shields. So now, as you can see, it's all back online. Lunastro is ready to fight again, and at close range, so the disruptors are going to come into play. 2 disruptors may seem like a very small amount, but it is beyond enough to stress large shields if they get hit consistently. So this seems to be a question of logistics, of course, because Lunastro can just refill the shields pretty easily, but can they do it before Game Knight, or can they do it quickly enough that they can resume battling, and then Game Knight is too busy losing energy to actually survive? So I think that Lunastro would probably want to disconnect armor and start aiming. Need to rotate, shields are... Oh, lost a large shield, that's very not good. Game Knight managed to be pushed out into the Ring of Death though. I think Lunastro needs to be aiming, managed to stress 2 of the large shields down, but is gonna have a rough time because Game Knight's gonna continue to just fire at that area and shred it, really. Lunastro continuing to have spinal beams, which means they have to aim their entire ship to aim the ions, as opposed to Game Knight that can rotate them freely. Kinda surprised, because Lunastro is a player known for aiming their ions. That is probably why they're trying to get distances so that they can set up their next phase of attack. Game Knight, wisely choosing to not let that happen, is probably in a faster ship, despite being diagonal, which is kind of surprising. Love Game Knight's ship, very unique. Love Luna's ship, I painted it. So this could really go either way. The Lunastro not disconnecting armor still, but frees their ions to no longer be spinal. I think Game Knight is trying to disconnect the armor, aiming for the explosive charge, which will instantly disconnect it. One of his prisms, when it's not aimed properly. Lunastro still managing to protect the reactor pretty well, drives Game Knight into the Ring of Death again. Probably? No, Game Knight switches directions quickly enough. And Lunastro has run out of side armor on their right side, which means that they cannot rely on it anymore to stay protected. As you can see, Game Knight could just turn and start firing again at the shields. The Lunastro is in a pretty rough position. And their armor is still there. Might be useful. It might be stuck. No, it's still one ship. Luna's Show probably trying to think of a plan to do, because they can probably just continue to stall with their corner and side armor. It's just a matter of coming up with a plan of attack that can actually beat Game Knight here. See, this is ideal. If you have aiming ions, then you can just force your opponent to target the wrong side of shields, while you continue to aim through those shields and be fine. It's something that Game Knight didn't have to do, but is presumably also capable of. It just requires that you have proper logistics set up for your shields, and they need to be coming back up online pretty actively for it to work out. But the right side is fine, so back to the other tilting. Very delicate dance for Lunastro. Game Knight just kind of has to like play keep away and not die, and then wins because of it. Lunastro running out of active shields. Oh my. And Lunastro loses a reactor. Game Knight does an excellent job of playing keep away, making sure to never let Lunastro get a ram or anything, because that would be catastrophic, and it would allow the disruptors to consistently fire. Mines, as we know. A lot of large shields. That's gonna be annoying to get through for Lunastro. Mines. 8 mines. I don't think that those are necessarily gonna come into play, but also missiles. This is very strange ship. Very curious one. Very curious to see how effective it is. So let's see. Game Knight wants to be running away in a straight line, and then wants Lunastro to chase him in a straight line, because that way the mines become a problem. And mines, as much of a joke as they can be at times, if you run straight through them, no matter how much armor you have, it's not a sustainable tactic. So let's see if the mines actually get launched. It's kind of difficult to tell, but I'll keep track of them to the best of my abilities. Lunastro is very aware of how catastrophic mines are, so they are making sure to not chase straight after him, and is instead trying to spiral towards him, maybe lead him into an asteroid, ideally. And Game Knight can effectively just choose to get away whenever he needs to, because he can just drop mines and then go full forward thrust. Right now, he's kind of just staying in range and trying to, I would say, bait Lunastro to going straight at him, because he's like, he's right there, just go at him. And then the mines launch, and then you have a problem. So Lunastro is using the side armor very effectively. Is digging through a corner, so that's now a weak point a little bit. This would be a pretty decent time for mines. But Game Knight still waiting for the particularly ideal shot. He's not really aiming the missiles at all, or if he is not aiming them well. Has done no breaching of Lunastro. Lunastro continues to effectively not take damage. The mines completely miss, huge whiff. None of them activate, not even on the sides. So now Lunastro has a few moments free where they can target and not be punished for it, because the mines are on cooldown. So Game Knight is probably going to be turning those back on. They're back on, yeah. And launches them again, and this is going to be a bad hit. Fortunately, does not lose a prism, but it would have been possible, and Lunastro is led into a rock, probably panicking about the mines. Unfortunately, Game Knight does not punish. Game Knight does nothing to punish here, and because Lunastro has some amount of rear thrust, it is much easier for them to rotate and get off. Let's look at the ammo storage. So mines are still fine. Missiles are about 1/3 empty. So Game Knight is still very much alive and healthy. And Lunastro is continuing to take damage. I don't think that they can take another 2/3 of what they've taken thus far. Or 3 times is what they've taken thus far, but another catastrophic blow from the mines. All that armor doesn't matter. Shields and prisms are taking damage because it was all shut offline. Small shields are the only thing keeping the defenses alive right now. Lunastro running for their life, trying to get away, knowing how dangerous it was what they just did, and managed to barely survive. Missiles have completely shorn through Lunastro's left side and is now forced to take bad piloting patterns or flight patterns to avoid it. Those missiles can unfortunately hit the rock and not hit the side. But Lunastro is probably going to be playing defensively. Chasing after Game Knight is no longer a sustainable strategy. And bleeding out the missiles is going to be their go-to plan, I would say. Fortunately, the disruptors are now free, at least, to get through these 6 shields. However, it depends on how effectively Lunastro can actually do that. And Game Knight is now in a position to put the mines in between him and Lunastro. So continuing to excellently space, a great example of how mines can be absolutely brutal if used effectively. It just requires that they're used effectively. Lunastro continuing to struggle with the rocks, having to maintain right whiff from the mines, almost very bad for Lunastro. Lunastro losing thrust and such, has to take wider and wider turns to prevent the missiles from hitting the sides, just like arcing around and hitting the sides. Has lost thrusters from doing that already, but is now aiming their ions. Took them long enough, unfortunately, but is now going to be slowly chipping away at the shield energy, and I presume that it's going to be, the reactor is going to be enough to outcompete that damage, but I could very much be wrong. Mines again. Destroyed the other corner, losing more thrust from Lunastro. It's not over yet, though. Another hit of the asteroid. Bouncing off of it. Losing control of their ship for a second. Trying to deal with the forces at play there. Is probably a little bit off balance. Is about to hit another asteroid, unfortunately. Spins to try and avoid it to some degree. Is continuing to have missiles. Lost a control room. That's what occurred. That's why they were spinning, is the thrusters were auto-firing accordingly. So Lunastro is deciding to try and play a tank or such. Turned off most of their thrusters, some of their ions, the small shields. So all they can really do is hope that Game Knight runs out of ammo at this point, but I don't think that's a likely occurrence. And that's a reactor gone. Most of the weapons. Lunastro forfeits. Excellent match. Demonstration of the effectiveness of mines. Mint does have to worry about the small ship, so it might finally be relevant. But I suppose if Mint just also, like, slaughters air by cutting through the ship, which Mint's already lining up the shot. So it did not destroy the reactor, but it did manage to break through 4 shields, which is very impressive. And that is already the ship cut in half. Now, the issue is that Mint is about to lose their control rooms. And that is it. So, this is a very difficult matchup. It is possible to win, but unlikely. Nuzmus has to depend on Kine doing exactly that, getting stuck on the rock. And if Kine doesn't get stuck on the rock, then he will just be in a position to continue firing at Nuzmus and ripping through his ship. Because Kine's ship has invested in firepower, where Nuzmus invested in maneuverability. And Kine, being able to leverage that firepower unconditionally, makes it so that the ship is just a numbers game, and Kine wins that game. So you have to involve technicalities of rocks. And if you can get your opponent stuck on a rock, suddenly your chances are slightly better, equal, whatever. However, it seems as though it's not likely to occur. Kine is doing an excellent job in preventing that from happening by carrying Nuzmus away from the rocks, despite the fact that Nuzmus wants to get to the rocks. Nuzmus likely should have been backing up to give as much time as possible and to give as many options for Kine to just completely screw up as possible. Ideally, you are... Let's see if this catches. Oh! So Kine is stuck. Kine splits to do this. Nuzmus does have control of his ship, so it depends on how quickly he can punish Kine for his transgressions. Is struggling to control his ship. Kine is not paying much attention. Does not split the second ship off, because this is dead ship. He needs to abandon it immediately. Yeah, there you go. And needs to get this out of the way. Nesmus has roughly equaled it now. This is exactly what I was talking about. The issue is that that ship is now probably going to be stuck. Oof. So it's roughly a third of a ship versus 2/3 of a ship, unless Kine can manage to get that free. If Kine manages to ram with this ship and get in the center, then he wins. But getting that ram is kind of difficult, and it's on a limited time frame. Kine very much struggling with piloting the third ships. Might have been focused trying to get this free, but I think that's going to be it. Kine is as stuck as you can possibly get. Unfortunately, Nesmus is going to not be able to get around the asteroid to fire at the other ship, I would say. So yeah, this is the avoider death loop, or such. And Kine has to either respect it, or has to take a huge risk and get really close. So now Nesmus can just switch directions. And as you can see, Nesmus took effectively no damage from that. He didn't lose any parts, he did take chip damage. Whereas if you look at Kine's front, he lost an entire cannon section, and a disruptor and a blaster. And that is pretty bad, and this could also blow up and cause more damage. As well as this being heavily damaged, these 3 parts. So that is exactly what Kine wants, is to instill panic and fear in Kine, to make it so he doesn't control his ship as masterfully as is necessary. So Kine, unfortunately, choosing not to go for the ram. Nesmus still retaining most of his HP here, and is firing from the side. This is ideal for Nesmus, where he wants to be firing constantly, and then Kine is too busy dealing with the rock, or fearing the rock, to actually fire back. Now Nesmus can switch directions again. Kine may need to choose to ram here. May not have a choice. So he slides off, is going to take a little bit of thruster damage. Going to take more damage on his weapons. Loses a shield. Losing thrusters. It may be prudent of Kine to disconnect his ships, go for flanking, because clearly this is not working currently. If you lose too much damage, or if you can't confirm that your burst damage is landing, then the shields regenerating is hugely problematic, because they just come back. The shields just turn back on. I might lose that ship to being stuck, but this ship might get the central reactor. Second ship is fine. So let's see how well Kine can deal with this, how well Nesmus can deal with this. So ideally you want Nesmus to be panicking and spinning because there's a ship ramming you, and then the other one flanks. Unfortunately, the other one is busy with a rock. However, this is ideal. Because it is a lot more difficult to manage 2 very fast ships than it is 1 very fast ship, even if 1 very fast ship is more dangerous. So now Nesmus is in a situation, is in quite the pickle, where the reactor is probably going to be fired upon, and if he is not careful, ends up with a bunch of cannons behind him. So he wants to get his back to an asteroid as quickly as possible. And has been doing an excellent job of spacing and making sure that the opponent is not behind him. Very nicely done on Nesmus's part. And Kine's 2 ships are sandwiched together. There is no way to get out of that, having been there. It is not reasonably possible. It's even worse than being stuck on an asteroid because they're so in each other's way. So Kine says GG. Okay, since they're doing whatever. An interesting note about Game Night ships is this red paint. Now, normally when a part has no power, no crew, or no ammo, it gives you a red symbol, which if you zoom out, is very similar to what this looks like. So this is an actual combat tactic of utilizing that red paint to give the impression that you don't have any weapons. Now, it is worth noting that it is completely inaccurate because you cannot see that symbol if it's not your ship. But despite that, the tactic is still effective because the symbol still means what it means regardless, even if it's just red paint. So in the past, I have been actually caught by that because I assumed that nuke launchers were not full. But while in fact they were. So I see that the reason Salos picks this ship is because it actually has point defense, which is going to significantly increase its longevity. That's the word. And is presumably going to utilize stall tactics because of how you can't get through the shields and you can't chase. So this might be a slower match. Game Knight is probably going to be trying to target the point defense. At least I would be, to try and make it so that my opponent is not capable of stalling forever. Solid, that's a pretty bad position to be in, where you're stuck and the missiles are just going to be continuing to hit your rear sides. Game Knight decides to just go away though, instead of punishing it. Let's see. Oh, that's pretty good lasing. Unfortunately, not functional, doesn't do much. Okay, so Game Knight. If Game Knight's not moving, Salifs can also not move. And if Salif's not moving, then the mines can't hit him. But he can still aim the ion at Game Knight, which could potentially break the shields. So if Game Knight is sitting still, then Salifs actually has an option to shoot at him unhindered. Though it's, you know, it wasn't taken advantage of when the first time it was presented. Missiles continue to wear away at Salifs, has an entire extra percentage point of health lost. Not super relevant, but it's not much relevant is happening. So Salifs can use momentum and rotate his ship and potentially laze the missiles. Game Knight is going to be switching directions, and because of how close he is, if he just launches the mines, they would likely hurt Salifs here. So Salifs, recognizing this, breaks off and does a full rotation trying to get away from it, recognizing his potential mistake. So see, this is what I mean. Salifs didn't need to move forward here, and because he does, now he has to break off, otherwise the mines are going to hurt him. Game Knight is forced into the Ring of Death, so there is damage being dealt here. Less to Salifs, but some. Salifs appears to have lost all of his rear armor, which is relevant. He could be taking thruster damage over time, and then eventually reactor damage. Or lose a prism, and then that just changed to the rest. Salifs doing an excellent job of spacing. I think his ship is a little bit faster, so is going to be continue jockeying Game Knight to stay out of the way. Mines do not arm fast enough, unfortunately. Mines do have an arming time in which they are completely non-lethal. They do no damage until they arm. However, they do pass through shields, so if he had been just a little bit farther away, mines that pass through his shields would have activated in front of them and done catastrophic damage, which is rare but exceedingly funny to see. Salifs drifting, sickly drifting past the mines, narrowly avoids ramming into all of them, takes a little bit of side damage, scuffs the paint a little bit. So Game Knight almost got lucky there. And really, it's like, Game Knight isn't struggling at all here. Salifs is running out of time, but Game Knight can just, like, continue to engineer those situations where mines are just dumped in front of Salifs and he has to, like, panic to get out of the way. Game Knight, in fact, is so confident that he's approaching head first with the unprotected missiles. So there we go. Salifs isn't moving as aggressively as he could be here, but now has to break off. Worth noting that the mines do last for some amount of time after they've been launched. So Salifs might not be aware of that, and there's more mines. It does destroy the point defense. The point defense on his left side is mostly gone, so that is a vulnerability. The shields are still active. Salifs taking advantage of the fact that the mines were inactive for a little bit. Loses a few thrusters for his trouble. Thrusters function as a form of armor, so to lose them is a bad sign. Oh, gonna be a good sign regardless, but, you know, whatever. Tries to continue to employ his right side of point defense as much as possible. His entire bottom left section of his ship is just completely vulnerable, and if you face that towards your opponent who is using missiles, then you're gonna suffer for it. So Salifs still has missiles coming in from behind. No longer has any armor protecting the prism, or any defenses protecting the prism. So an unlucky... Oh, well. Salif got caught once and was punished dearly for it. Talos, failing to recognize that he is actually, in fact, dead, is functionally a person who had a cannonball blown through them and is bleeding out, but is still moving because they don't recognize that they're dead. So let's see how long Salif continues to spasm, because really that's what this is. Takes more mines. Game Night won to rub salt in the wound, kills Salif with mines again, really driving home the mistake he made. A very slight tickle with the ions. That is a rough position. Salif already takes a huge blow to his side armor, loses point defense. That is a very rough start to this match, I would say. Passes off the rock, loses enough speed that Game Knight's mines are, again, in effect. Salif has to try and avoid them. Doesn't lose the point defense, at least, this time. Let's highlight those so we can see when they're back on. So they are now armed again. Mines, the launchers rearm very quickly. And it is very easy to continue to just tell your opponent to screw off and just put mines in front of them. And they have to respect it or they die. And because they spend so much time avoiding the mines or avoiding the threat of mines, essentially makes it so that you have infinite reload time, or have no reload time on the mines, and you can just instantly launch them again. Even if you completely miss the mines, like launch them in the wrong direction, the opponent still has to break off in the threat of them because they do so much damage. This is a good position for the mines. Salif manages to miss them. This is one of the best engagements that Salif has had this entire time. But the mines are going to be active. And it does catastrophic damage to the armor. There is no more front armor. However, Game Night is going to be taking actual damage here. Until the mines turn back on. And they activated behind the shields! So I can't wait to watch this ship get slaughtered again because Air clearly doesn't have experience using it and it gets killed like the first thing in every match. You have to not send it by itself, buddy. If you send it by itself, it's just gonna get focused and killed. Like, I feel bad for the crew on this thing because, like, okay, guys, I guess we're just screwed again. Captain sent us on a suicide mission, and there it goes. Manages to avoid the rails, but it's not long for this world. The low velocity of Nuzmus's rails are... an issue at hitting it at far range, but, you know, close range works too. So as we can see, Air is much, much lighter. So Nuzmus just doesn't care about the tractor beams. In fact, Air is helping Nuzmus because it just pushes him back away. So Nuzmus is just gonna probably stress the shields and then break them, and then the match is likely gonna be over. Let's see what Air tries to do here. As you can see, can get nowhere near close enough though. Might even get flipped. Loses a reactor already. Oof. Ouch. Air, assuming that they lose this match, probably a safe assumption. Getting flipped. The funny thing is that, like, despite the fact that tractor beams being set in a wide array like that helps you, it also helps your opponent because you essentially gave them a huge set of handlebars. And Nuzmus doesn't even need to flip. They're doing it probably for fun. But, like, as you can see on this far left side, they can just go through the shields. It's not a problem. It's worth noting that these railguns have a huge amount of firepower. And though Nuzmus's ship is slower, it doesn't really matter because you can just overcome opponent defenses. Air is managing to hold the rails back for the time being, catching them on the center. So it'll depend on Nuzmus getting a better shot, like that one. So Air, similar to Salaf's, is a walking dead man, but doesn't yet recognize it, and we choose different targets. It's kind of very useful. Like, avoiders are one of the best options to fight swarms, since you can just, like, kite and target them all individually instead of ever getting surrounded, because the maneuverability is actually very, very useful there, but it doesn't come up often because swarms are not prevalent, as avoiders are also not super prevalent. So Nuzmus is going to be wanting to hide behind the rock again, of course, because it will prevent the tractor beams from getting a good lock on. Air misjudged which direction Nuzmus was going and again sacrificed the drone ship. And there goes. Nuzmus has infinitely more points, even if it's just patterns. Finally we're getting somewhere. Alright, so those blasters are very difficult, have a very difficult time breaking through shields, because the shields are very high health and blasters are, you know, it's kind of like ions, but not as bad, because they're about dealing sustained damage, and shields are about tanking sustained damage. So trying to get the disruptors to track properly can be very difficult, especially when Air is doing a pretty good job of balancing all of the incoming damage. Oh, Air's not careful, could lose the control room. Now Nuzmus is maintaining distance properly, doing this the right way, I would say. And I'm pretty sure that this ship has significantly less thrust. Like, it only has 4 banks as opposed to the, like, 7 before, so it cannot leverage its tractor beams nearly as well. I was expecting that it would get, like, flips of the same effectiveness off as the other ship did, Neuralgia, but unfortunately, because it has so few thrusters, it cannot do it to the same degree. And that is all of the shields down. So that is one lost shield. Cut supply line right there, so that thruster's gonna be turning off too. And Air flips back around, is now presenting the weakened section again, and is split. Now, this presents an interesting problem. No, it doesn't, because these ships can only spin. They can't flank at all. Unless Nuzmus decides to do, like, show his back to this one, I think that's gonna be it. Because Air cannot get behind him, and the tractor beams are useless. So this is a pretty good demonstration why you need to have weapons. And if you use tractor beams instead of weapons, you need to have thrust to support the tractor beams. Air kind of went all in on countering missiles, and very clearly, that doesn't mean you have anything to work with when you're not fighting missiles. Alright, the first time we've seen this, I think, it is tractor beam missiles. Interesting. Lovely paint. This is one of the best paints in the tournament. It actually has colors. I don't know who this is, but I imagine it's a character that somebody's going to tell me about. Those might be apples with butterflies. Apples or butterflies. Apples and butterflies? I don't know. Can't wait to see this ship die again. I'm gonna, like, be crying if I get to it. If I have to watch it after this. So, here we are. Nuzmus is struggling to get away because, of course, Game Knight is very fast, and the shields are holding up pretty well. But it is, of course, difficult to continue to consistently protect your ship with the shields. Because the shields are very scary, or the ions are very scary, and despite all the shields, the ions will burn through it given enough time. So now Air has to turn. No, Game Knight has to turn. Nesmus has to turn. There we go. All the shields are back up. So this is Game Knight's issue now. He has to manage somehow to focus on one specific area long enough to actually deal damage. Whereas Nesmus just has to like spin once and like there's more shields in the way. That's getting pretty low, lasing it repeatedly. However, Nesmus also has the same issue, where he has to focus on one specific area and try and cut through it with disruptors, and it's just going to be very problematic trying to do that. Because the 5 shields are very strong, and Game Knight has excellent logistics based on how effectively they've been kept online. So let's see if the disruptors eventually get through it. It's typically, in my experience as somebody who plays in similar matchups, you have to get rid of the armor, otherwise it's too easy to block a majority of shots with it. Or you have to get far enough away, and Game Knight is taking a lot of damage. That's gonna be it. Just one more volley. There we go. Almost. There we go. Game Knight detonates the explosive charge, trying to get away somehow, for some reason. And Game Knight loses the first match. Also doesn't have his ion set to auto fire. Isn't there nothing? Well, if he can kite effectively, this is great. And it's gonna take super long time for those rails to get through the shields. Especially when Game Knight can just rotate and they're protected until they recharge. However, he does need to aim at the front, I would say. Aiming at the corners isn't gonna do much. I suppose he could be accounting for the tractor beams. Getting real close to that ship. Getting close is really bad. Don't get way too close. There we go. That's what I was talking about. This is gonna aim and painful. Painful. And Game Knight needs to have 3 wins in a row to get second place. So Game Knight choosing to embrace kiting. The armor was too much of a weight, so he's going to kite. And Nesmus needs to recognize this and start backing up immediately. And that's already a large shield loss. That's catastrophic damage. And a second. I think that, well, Game Knight really didn't punish because he was stuck on a rock, but Nesmus, needs to be very careful here. Nesmus is very much on the back foot now, because Game Knight's ship is excellent at kiting and can do it all day, and will do it all day. I faced it. So Nesmus is probably going to be drawing this out, hoping that Game Knight makes a mistake. Here we go. Game Knight not paying attention, didn't do anything to start ramping up his thrusters, is taking a lot of damage here. Nesmus needs to continue to put on the pressure before Game Knight can get away. And Game Knight has to refocus and is losing shields. He's going to be losing shields. Nesmus lost 2 large shields on his other side. He's very much on a time limit, but he's lost no firepower. He's effectively at full health, and Game Knight just has to run away and loses his prisms. I think that's going to be it. Game Knight stopped paying attention for a single moment, suffered dearly for it. With huge thrusters on kites, you need to keep them ramped up, you need to keep them hot. Otherwise, your opponent jumps on top of you with your standard thrusters. Nesmus instantly proving me wrong. Forward standard thrusters was clearly the superior option here, and it gave him the win. I don't see Game Knight realistically winning this. I am going to call it. Nesmus is the winner of the tournament. Nicely done.